Here is Anatoly Karlin. He's one of my very favorite speakers. He's right there. He's a Russian blogger who writes about all futurism, paleo, psychometrics, all kinds of things. That's at akarlin.com. akarlin.com. He's one of my favorite speakers. Here he is, Anatoly.
I have no idea. People who boast about the IQ are losers. That's what Stephen Hawking said when asked about his IQ. And you can't really dispute that. People who boast about their IQs are maybe not losers, but strange at any rate. But the problem is, though, is that it's reflective of the kind of snide and dismissive attitude that some people might have towards discussions of IQ and intelligence and their importance. I'm going to be making the contrary argument here. I'm going to be looking at history. I'm going to be making the case that intelligence and various forms of intelligence, they've been critical to world progress, in particular world technological progress, and that if anything, its influence on hugely significant things such as the global wealth and poverty are, if anything, increasing. That said, there's two preliminary things I want to say. First, I hope you guys like graphs, because there'll be a whole ton of them. Secondly, I'm going to from the outset state that my position that IQ and intelligence, they are real things. They are not a social construct, as some commentators might say. Psychometrics is an established subject which was founded more than a century ago by Francis Galton, who was the nephew of Charles Darwin, and by Charles Spearman. There's a huge amount of statistical evidence behind it. Virtually all psychologists say in opinion polls that it is a real thing, and measures a real thing, which loosely defined means the ability to perform complex mental tasks. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, it works with images, right? I doing it right? Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I guess it doesn't work for images, just the PowerPoint presentations. Okay, so this is a graph of, on the left-hand side, you see the GDP per capita in purchasing power parity terms. That's more reflective of living standards than just GDP per capita, because it accounts for varying price levels in different countries. And below you have the human capital of a particular country, which I used, and I used here as a measure the average of the PISA teams and teams. These are international standardized assessments. And if 500 is actually the equivalent of to an IQ of 100, the standard deviation here is 100, so 400 would be equivalent to an IQ of 85, 600 would be equivalent to an IQ of 115. And so here you have various countries plotted along here, and as you can see, there's a good correlation here of 0.43. But you might valid and let's go on. Yeah. Okay. And the next, the thing is, though, that this correlation gets much better when you only count countries which have been capitalist. So the countries which are marked in red over there, they are countries which have a huge amount this case, diamonds production per capita. And the, um, the, the green triangles, they're countries that have a history of central planning. And as it turns out that central planning, as most people agree, has its enormous economic impacts, and they are on average below what we would expect. But as for the others, you see a very neat correlation, and that correlation is in fact 0.83, and that's a very solid result for a social sciences. For social scientists, any correlation above 0.3 or so is considered to be a good correlation. You still have some minor outliers. The biggest one to the upside is actually the U.S., where richer than we should be. I mean, we're too dumb to be as rich as that. There's here's the United States. There's different explanations for this. Maybe it's because of the U.S. dollar's status as a reserve currency that gives an economic advantage. Has very favorable geography, a truly unified market with 310 million consumers, whereas the European Union, it's got different languages, still has a barrier, and national borders as well, despite the attempts to may make it into one market. But in general, it's a really good fit when you take away the oil and resource exporters who focus on that. The countries with socialist legacies, that's the former Soviet Union, the former Central Eastern Europe, and China, which really should be higher than it is. And guess what? It's growing at 10% per year, funnily enough, and that's no doubt no accident. Despite the fact that there's still a lot of corruption and still a lot of regulations and so on, it seems that human capital is simply far more important, the most critical element to growth. Now, you could make the argument that the relationship goes the other way. So, as they say, correlation isn't causation. But there's two major arguments against this. First of all, there's the idea that the exception proves the rule. All the exceptions to it have a clear explanation. They are either the big oil exporters, which are artificially inflated, or the countries with a socialist legacy, which are artificially underinflated. We can also see that it's true at the national level. This is, for instance, a graph for Italian provinces. So, like this seems to apply even within regions. So here are the exceptions. The biggest positive outlier there is Rome capital, and I guess that would make sense because although the wealth not naturally gravitates to a capital city anyway. And here's the second piece of the evidence. Again, taking Italy as a kind of microcosm of this. We see that there's actually no correlation really, 0.05. It's like doesn't really matter between the performance in the PISA tests and the spending on education. Oh yeah, certainly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in general, of course, if you have a country which is a big oil exporter, and if education spending really led that easily to an increase in performance, then you would expect those big oil exporters like Dubai, for instance, to be right up there in performance on these tests, but that isn't happening. And yeah, even in this show, you also have this correlation once you take out regions which are artificially inflated, thanks to these awesome endowments. Why might that be the case? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'm going to mention two possibilities. First of all, there's this chart shows the typical IQ range you need for different types of job. Here you've got assemblers, food workers, waitresses, which cleaners, and at the bottom you have professors and doctors. Pretty obvious stuff. It's clear that it's hard to make a living as a CEO or a professional if you have an IQ of less than 115 or so. There's a certain risk of failure. A lot of stages when you produce a widget like a car or something. If one of those parts is faulty, certain intelligent workforce. Otherwise, the thing to note to the speed there, the probability of failure on any one gadget would be high, and as a consequence, a lot of the final products would so perhaps that that it would be inefficient. Simply, it would be more efficient to sell those resources directly instead of trying to add value to them. This is a map of the PISA scores from 2009. I used why am I using PISA here? Firstly, because it's a standardized international survey. It's carried out every 3 years. It's highly regarded, and they try to make it as culture neutral as possible. And it loads heavily on G, so it correlates well with IQ tests. But unlike with IQ tests, you don't really have standardized programs which test IQ. So it's probably more efficient to rely on PISA, and certainly less open to criticism from the point of view that, say, some IQ test might be different in one country from one country to another, because main point of it is that it's standardized and allows these sorts of comparisons. Yes, they don't have those measurements, but extrapolating from the IQ tests, they would be deep red like India. Okay. And this has consequences. If as I have argued, it is true that that intelligence is so important for economic growth, then we can see that some countries would have brighter prospects than others. In particular, for instance, BRICS is often advanced as one group. So Brazil, Russia, India, and China. But in reality, as we see there, The average IQ as derived from the PISA tests, it's actually really high in China, and it's moderately high in Russia, or at least closer to the developed than it is to the developing countries. But it's considerably lower in Brazil and very much lower than India. So a practical conclusion you could draw from that and use it to build economic forecasts and ideas on where to invest and so on is that China and Russia probably have better medium and long-term prospects for economic development and convergence with the developed world than do Brazil and India. And there's practical evidence for that as well. As I pointed out, China has been consistently growing at 10% per year ever since it cast aside the Maoist system of economic development, which was absolutely crazy. Whereas Brazil has been pretty much standing in place. India has been advancing a bit, but it's from an extremely low base. Oh yeah, and this is one criticism of China in these PISA tests, as some of you who follow this might have heard, is that they only officially release the results from Shanghai. And some people take it to mean that it's artificially inflated because all of the brightest people in China flock to Shanghai and they have the best schools and so forth. And to an extent that's true. The PISA-derived IQ in Shanghai is 112. But the thing is, they've also leaked results from some other provinces. They actually only released the results from Shanghai, but there were actually 12 other provinces which participated in that study. And I actually found this data on the internet, and the average IQ, PISA-derived IQ for China is 103. So still very impressive. Now, why it's the wealth and poverty of nations today, but now I'm also going to examine what kind of effect it has had historically. Now, one problem is that there's no for is a necessary stepping stone to develop human accomplishments in literature and science, and because when you're illiterate, first of all, your cognitive processes are different. So, as one researcher said, who was investigating differences in the thought processes of literate and illiterate peoples, taking Soviet Central Asia in the 1920s as an example, he found that it also changes her or his cognition to a certain extent. This study shows that education has a fundamental effect on the formation of cognitive processes. The researchers found out that illiterate respondents, unlike literate ones, preferred concrete names for colors to abstract ones, and situative groups of items to categorical items. Furthermore, illiterate respondents could not solve syllogistic problems like the following one. Precious metals do not get rust. Gold is a precious metal. Can gold get rust or not? These syllogistic problems did not make any sense to illiterate respondents because they were out of the sphere of their practical experience. Literate respondents who had at least minimal formal education solved the suggested syllogistic problems easily. Therefore, literate workers, soldiers, inventors, and so on turn out to be more effective than illiterate ones, not only due to their ability to read instructions, manuals, and textbooks, but also because of the developed skills of abstract thinking. So, from this point on, in my historical investigation, I'm now switching from intelligence, which we can now measure directly. We can no longer measure it, but we are going to use literacy rates as a proxy. Now, the researcher Van Zanten, and he made some impressive data gathering. He gathered data on the amount of manuscript books published annually from the 16th to 15th centuries. As you can see, during the Renaissance in the 14th and 15th century, Italy and the Netherlands were pretty much ahead of the rest of Europe. But, in consequent centuries, as the printing press took off, other countries came to the forefront, and we can see that in particular the amount of books per capita. Okay, the amount of books per capita in Great Britain increased greatly in comparison to those of other countries, and places like Italy, for instance, you can see fell behind, and Germany, the Netherlands, Great Britain forged ahead, as you can see the Protestant countries. This was a result of the Protestant insistence on reading the Bible for oneself. And using that data, Van Zanten compiled a series of estimates on relative literacy rates in these various European countries. So, as we can see, the highest literacy rates around the late 16th century, that's the Renaissance, were in Italy and the Netherlands, whereas the other countries were pretty minor. Whereas by the 19th century, this was most advanced, and Great Britain had advanced greatly in particular. So had Germany, so had Sweden, from practically zero. You can see the effects of the Protestant Revolution outlined in the Protestant emphasis on reading the Bible for oneself. And here's a graph for England in particular. As you can see, even by the mid-17th century, half of English men were literate. That's amazingly high for a pre-industrial society. And what's more, there were very significant differences in England and the advanced countries of Europe in general by the 17th, 18th century relative to previous civilizations. There's one way of estimating this is that people who are illiterate, they tend to, when asked for their age, they tend to say that they are, oh, I'm 40 years old, I'm 50 years old. They give it in multiples of 5. They don't keep good track of the actual age. That's a symptom of innumeracy. And based on the fraction of people who, but in reality only 20% of people should actually have an age which is a multiple of 5. And by calculating the difference between the number of people who say that the age is a multiple of 5 and what it should be, 20%, you can get an estimate of the illiteracy rate. And even in advanced antique civilizations such as Rome, among rich people, urban rich people, the illiteracy rate was 50%, whereas by 1790, even among the poor of England in a Coffer Castle, let's say a small town, it was about 10%. So it's a vast shift in literacy rates and in cognitive potential. Okay, let's go on. And it's reflected very neatly in maps of cultural achievement. These maps are from Charles Murray, the book Human Accomplishment, and it shows for each period the places where the most highly cited artists, writers, musicians, and scientists came from. As you can see, in 1400 to 1600, this was, you can see the major concentrations are in northern Italy and in the Netherlands. If you recall a couple of slides back, those are also the two regions with the by far the highest literacy rates in that period. As you go on into the era of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, England starts becoming really prominent just as its literacy rate begins to expand really rapidly, as does southern Germany, the places of the where also Protestantism came and encouraged literacy. And here you have this for 1800 to 1950. Same pattern. And there was also a pretty good correlation between book production per capita and GDP per capita growth during the period once industrialism went off going and Malthusian limits disappeared and people started getting richer. So one frequently asked question is why did the Industrial Revolution happen in Northwestern Europe and in England in particular? And plenty of people have written about the topic. There are almost as many explanations as there are historians who study the problem. But one useful way of looking at it, I think, is that simply we have to bear in mind that from the middle of the 17th century, England was probably the world's first massively literate society. By the 18th century, 25% of households had books, and you had people discussing the new industrial techniques that were coming along and exchanging data on a scale that was vastly greater than what was possible in antique societies with vastly dates were typically confined to priestly elites or aristocrats who, by the way, had other priorities. In these industrial societies, there was usually a sort of social discrimination against people who involve themselves in manufactures, and that stopped being the case in England around this time. Of course, having coal reserves helped as well. Yeah, I don't have time to explain this. Let's go on. Okay. Right. And another pretty big and important difference between England and East Asia. So East Asia was actually, in some ways, for all that, pretty advanced in the 17th, 18th centuries. For instance, they had higher life expectancy. They had high average standards of medical care. They were really low, nonetheless, but still higher than in Europe. And they were also much more sanitary than Europe. But ironically, what happened is that because of those lower death rates, people the population grew closer to the carrying capacity of the land. So on average, people had less to eat there. And nutrition is pretty important to IQ. It's very important to IQ, in fact. And one result of this is that well, as you can see here, animal fats throughout English history constituted from 30 to 50% of calories consumed. In Japan and India, and it's not shown here, but China as well, it only constituted about 5% of consumed calories, the vast majority coming from grains. And the animal product calories are higher quality for brain development and the development of intelligence. So not only was England more literate, but they had better brain food. Okay, let's go on. So yeah, this was also, you can see, demonstrated an average height. The average Japanese was 160 centimeters tall in the late 19th century, as was the average Indian, and in China it was only slightly higher, whereas the English, the French, the Northern Italians, the Swedes were much higher. Yeah, good nutrition obviously leads to greater height, so that's normal. So yeah, we have come to the end of this historical episode. Hope I've shown that literacy and human capital was pretty critical towards human technological and cultural development. At least they correlate really well. This is we'll just quickly run through these slides. And also, intelligence also contributes to a better society. As you can see, this figures from Charles Murray again, the clear distinction in average wealth and IQ. From lesser chances of dropping out of high school. Actually, as in all of these slides, SES refers to the social-economic status of the parents. So, as you can see, the IQ plays a much greater role than who your parents are. Okay, what's going on? Same for getting a bachelor's degree. Same for chances of being in poverty. Yeah, okay. So yeah, at the end, finally, I'm going to come to the last part, which is prescriptions and effects on policy. And through my research on this issue, I'm actually planning to write a book on this. I've identified 6 major elements that you need to maximize the level of intelligence in a society. The first one is, of course, literacy, because without literacy, even if you are intelligent, you can't really use it effectively in a technological society which is based on text. You can communicate much more with text and much more. It's much higher bandwidth than relying on speech, which you have to do if you're illiterate. Although one thing I would note is that there's a diminishing returns on further education. So literacy essential, primary school extremely important, secondary school important, university probably not so much. Only maybe 25% of the population really benefits from it. The rest probably would be better off not taking the debt and just taking the money. Okay, could we move on? So yeah, this is a picture of a Native American when the Europeans first arrived to the New World. They noted that they were really lean and muscular, but they were actually better fed than Europeans. But they were illiterate and they got swept aside. Okay. Okay. The second. Can we go back to slides, please? Yeah. The second one is you need adequate nutrition, and if you've heard of the Flynn effect, it's the tendency for IQ to increase over the decades. So actually, 100 years ago, the average IQ levels in the US, for instance, were from 15 to 25 points lower than they are today. And Flynn argued that, well, it's a puzzle where that comes from, but I think the major reason is there's two reasons for why this happened. First, people started getting better fed, so malnutrition and in particular worms even were a problem in the United States a century ago. Now they are practically non-existent, though unfortunately they're still a major issue in India and Africa and some other third world countries. And handful policy in particular has done some good work on eradicating worms in some third world countries. And the one that thing about malnutrition in particular also applies to particular nutrient deficiencies. There's several of them. There's zinc, there's magnesium, but the key one really, which is the most important one by far, is iodine. So without enough iodine, you get diseases like goiter. It also substantially lowers your IQ by 10 to 15 IQ points. The introduction of fortified salt with iodine in the United States in the 1920s was probably the single biggest bang for the bucks intervention into raising IQ in American history. Okay, let's go on. This is we're getting into slightly politically incorrect territory here, but intelligence is, all the studies show, highly heritable. Estimates range from 40% to 80%, but most of them are converging towards the high end of that scale. And one thing we see is that historically in England, at any rate, there's evidence that during the late medieval period and early modern period in England, wealthier people who on average could be expected to be more intelligent left more children than average. This comes from the book Gregory, A Farewell to Arms by Gregory Clark. I highly recommend it. And another extreme example of this is the development of Jewish Ashkenazi intelligence. So the most learned Torah scholars got to marry the rabbi's daughter. The dumber half of the Jewish male population went up and married the Gentiles who didn't marry at all. So what you have is a really rapid eugenic increase in Jewish intelligence during the Middle Ages and early modern period. Pretty interesting stuff. We don't have time to go into it in further detail right now. But today this tendency has reversed itself by 180 degrees. So this is there was a big study in the American population. The IQ test they used was pretty simple. The number of percentage of words out of 10 that people could correctly define, but it has a good correlation with IQ. And they also asked a variety of questions of them in addition to this, such as like life questions, and in particular one of the questions they asked is how many children they had. And as you can see, the premise of the movie Idiocracy is actually true. On average, intelligent people aren't only having fewer children on average, but the average age at which they have them is considerably higher than those of less intelligent people. And it's not going to have major consequences in a decade or two, in a half a century, or especially a century. It probably will. Okay. Yeah, that's from the poster for that movie. And this is the graph on the left shows the IQ bell curve for a Chinese village which was found to be iodine deficient. and a Chinese village which was iodine insufficient. So as you can see, that's a pretty major difference. That's 15 IQ points. So one good thing about it is that sometimes relatively easy interventions can make huge differences, and these low-hanging fruits should be, people should really focus on picking them up, because they're a lot cheap and easy to implement than some advanced learning programs, and at least do them first. Okay. Another major negative impact on IQ is inbreeding, and it's actually the incidence of so-called consanguineous marriage. That's when a father's brother's daughter, for instance, my father's brother's daughter, I marry her. That's actually quite common in the Muslim world, unfortunately, and it leads, there's a clear correlation between that and declines in IQ. The IQ scale is the one on the left. The incidence of consanguineous marriage is the scale on the bottom, and that should really be stamped out, but unfortunately it goes against some social mores, so there's difficulties with that. One advantage of the PISA test is that it also had some data on the scores of natives in different countries relative to immigrants, and those are the gaps. Again, politically incorrect, but one way to, if not raise IQ, but to forestall decline, is to have a more vigorous or selective immigration policies, like what you have in Canada, Australia, or Singapore. Well, that was gloomy. Now on to some futurist, transhumanist, optimistic stuff. So maybe all of that stuff won't really be necessary if the Panglossian scenarios of progress and the self-improvement come to pass. This is from the video game Deus Ex Human Revolution. It's set in 2027, and people get augments like super strong arms and super strong legs and bulletproof skin, and among other things, you see that chip he has on his head. That's shows his that allows him to hack things quickly. You can imagine scenarios in which you could have some extra memory there, or like a CPU or something that accelerates your thinking process. In which case, some of the more pessimistic or politically incorrect consequences identified earlier might not be necessary if we really start quickly developing these augmentation and technologies and biotechnologies to improve humanity. Yeah, that's my talk.